All right, everybody, welcome back into Cherry Picking today, joined by Gav again. And today we're going to be going over the rest of the season schedules, looking at the 5 easiest schedules and the 5 hardest schedules, kind of see where these teams lie in the standings right now, and what moves you can make either on your sports book in terms of fantasy for the rest of the season. Gav, do you look at this as any, do you hold it precedent to other things that you're looking at in terms of day-to-day betting, or is it just primarily you're looking at this for like the rest of the season kind of numbers?
Yeah, honestly, like I never really looked at it too much before. Maybe I looked at it a lot whenever the Leafs were in the hunt for the first overall pick in the Matthews situation in 2016. But no, obviously, like in fantasy, you want to look at matchups. If you're looking at the waiver and seeing who guys are playing, it's important to know who they are playing. But when you're looking at it on such a big scale like this, I think it's more important for looking at maybe some playoff futures or
even getting a better idea of maybe what the playoff picture will actually
eventually look like. Yeah, we'll get into that. Like there's a couple teams on here that like they should be scared. They have some pretty tough schedules and they're going to be battling for a wild card spot. So it will be interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like we'll get into the teams, and we've talked about the kind of the switch or the power switch this year or the last 2 years, maybe like the Eastern Conference is way better than the West. And you see like the teams with the 5 hardest remaining schedules pretty much all in the East. Teams with the 5 easiest schedules pretty much all in the West. Yeah. So obviously like that narrative is playing into it, which is interesting because there used to be some really good teams obviously in the West.
To add on that, like I was looking at the West and like I think it was the Central, the hardest schedule was like the 12th ranked one there. And then in the Pacific, it was like 14th. So there's just a huge discrepancy there.
Yeah. All right, so let's get right into it here. We're going to be looking at the hardest schedules first. So the team with the hardest remaining schedule. As a Canadiens fan, I look at this as a positive because maybe they will get a better chance of getting Bedard. But the Montreal Canadiens have the toughest remaining schedule. Mm-hmm. They have to play, just look at some of their toughest opponents. They have to play Boston twice, Carolina 3 times, and Carolina, I feel like, is just going to go on a tear after this All-Star break.
It sucks so much about Pacioretty.
I know.
If they can add someone like if they can add Meyer, like I'll be betting them to win the cup.
Like even, I don't know if you listened to like the Rob Brindamore interview on Spin Chicklets. He was like, we had our guy. Like we wouldn't have need to made a move at the deadline because they had Max Pacioretty who had like 3 goals in his first 4 games.
Yeah, he started off looking really good too.
And then ripped his other Achilles or the same one,
I think
which is pretty common, I've heard, with that type of injury. If you tear one, the other one usually goes too. So that's really too bad. But still, obviously, a really good team leading right now the Stanley Cup odds. And then they played Jersey twice, Tampa Bay twice, and the Leafs twice. So that is a really, really hard schedule. The Habs have just ripped off 3 wins. I wouldn't put too much stock into it. I think at this point, we're going to look at Montreal really falling off here for the rest of the season, especially because they're without a lot of their guys.
Yeah, they're pretty much a borderline AHL team out there right now. There's so many young guys coming up. I think we can attribute that hot past couple games due to all these hungry players coming up and just wanting to prove something. But ultimately, it's just bound to die out.
Yeah, and you look at the standings too in terms of trying to get maybe like the top spot in the lottery. The chances are very slim right now with how bad Columbus and Chicago have been. Columbus is at 36 points right now. Montreal's at 50. So there's a 14-point discrepancy there. I don't think that'll narrow as much. Even the fact that Montreal does have a really hard schedule, like that's a really, really big point differential there. Since they have such a tough schedule, like we do obviously talk about shots on goal props. Is there a player on Montreal that you might start to look to fade for the rest of the season who's been playing maybe decently well over the last couple of games?
I don't know really, because if you're talking about shot props, like none of them really shoot that much anyway. Like none of them have too like scary of a line where it's like 4.5 or maybe even 3.5. I would start like fading some of those. In terms of fantasy, I don't know. Man. Like the guys that were maybe like 5th, 6th round picks in fantasy, like Suzuki or something, are getting elevated roles now or having more offensive responsibility than you originally would have. So I'm probably not going to fade anyone.
In terms of fantasy too, I think at this point, any of these guys you could try to play in like a plus matchup, but like we said, they have really tough schedule for the rest of the time. So I wouldn't really put stock into any of these guys other than maybe, I don't even want to say Sam Montembeault because he's been playing well, but again, they're playing Boston, Carolina. Like these teams could score 4 or 5 on them like at any given night. So Montreal obviously tough. We're going to see a really tough end of the season for them, I think. The next team with the second hardest remaining schedule is the Detroit Red Wings. Looking at some of the teams they have to play, it's similar to Montreal. Boston twice, Carolina twice, Tampa twice, and then Leafs and Rangers one more time each. What's your opinion on this Red Wings team? Because they've kind of bounced around all season. You saw them playing really well before the All-Star break. and it was mainly because of Ville Husso. But now Husso hasn't been playing as great, but their offense has been a little bit elevated.
Yeah.
But that also could have been maybe just because of plus matchups.
Yeah, I think they're dead. But I do think they are exactly where they should be.
Yeah, that's fair.
Some people I think were a bit hyped on them this year, thinking they will make the playoffs. But again, it's still a rebuilding team with a lot of young pieces. If I was a Red Wings fan, I wouldn't really be upset about this. I think it is probably a good thing that they have a hard schedule for those young players, because the playoff race is going to get tighter and they're going to play in tougher games, and that's going to ultimately be better for their development.
Yeah, that's such a really good point. I thought you were going to kind of go the direction of them even building this roster further with another top 15 draft pick this year, which seems like they could get maybe a top 20 at the very least, because this draft is absolutely stacked. The top 5 picks could all, I think, in other drafts be first overall picks, if that's not too crazy to say. There's some really good prospects, so
For sure.
you could definitely get a really good prospect at 20, in between the 15 and 20 range. But yeah, they are 6 points behind the wild card spot right now, but they have a couple games in hand to Washington, who is reeling a little bit. But we'll get into some of the other teams. I think there's better options to make bets on to maybe win the playoffs, or to make the playoffs at this point in the East. The next team we'll be looking at, the Buffalo Sabres, the third hardest schedule remaining, a team that's kind of right on that playoff bubble, maybe a team that's going to be making a move at the deadline. They've got Boston twice, Carolina again. We just saw them play Carolina. Carolina just absolutely dominated them, which is starting to... I was all in on this Buffalo team to make the playoffs. So watching that game, seeing how they can compete with Carolina, they didn't compete at all, pretty much. And then they have New Jersey twice, Tampa twice, and then the Leafs twice again. So they're plus 600 to make the playoffs, 6-1 at DraftKings right now. Do you think it's realistic, or maybe a value bet to place a wager on the Sabres, considering there have been in trade talks for Chychrun, Meyer, and pretty much all the main guys, I guess, at this point, who are in the deadline?
Yeah, I think maybe a value bet, but looking at the schedule, they've been on a skid recently too. The main problem is they don't have any goaltending.
Yeah.
So at this point, I don't really care who they're playing, because they don't have anyone in net that can stop the puck consistently on a nightly basis.
Yeah, you have Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, you have Craig Anderson, and then Eric Comrie. It's been the three cast of misfits, and kind of just Granato's been riding the hot hand wherever it's been, but unfortunately there hasn't really been a hot hand recently.
I think a lot of Sabres fans are they just want to see them make the playoffs because they haven't seen it in so long, but really I don't think it'd be the worst thing if they didn't. They still could use another pick. They're still a couple years away anyway. But
do you think they will make a move for Chychrun or Meyer, or do you think at this point?
I don't know.
I've heard a lot of people say that they're very interested in Jacob Chychrun, which kind of bolster that defensive core, give them a little bit more structure, but at this point, I kind of agree with you. I don't think they're the best bet to make the playoffs at this point. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. Pittsburgh and Washington aren't playing great right now, but they're still, I think, just much more complete, better teams with a little bit more veteran presence at this point.
Yeah.
The next team, the New York Islanders, have the fourth hardest remaining schedule. They play Boston, Carolina, New Jersey, Tampa twice, and then the Leafs. So not as much of a gauntlet as those top 3 teams, but still tough. I mean, if you watch any of our content, you know that I'm out on the Islanders. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. They also have, other than Florida, they have the fewest games left to play. They have 25 compared to Detroit and Buffalo have 30. So they're not in a playoff spot either right now. They're plus 300 to make the playoffs, which is a little concerning if you're an Islanders fan. I thought that the odds were going to be a little shorter, to be honest.
Especially picking up Bo Horvat.
Exactly. You pick up Bo Horvat. They had a couple wins since they picked him up. They just recently lost to the Sens, but games like that will happen. Sorokin has been letting in way more goals than we're used to seeing actually recently, especially against some pretty shitty teams too.
Like the Canucks.
Like the Canucks too, and then the Sens. So seeing them playing those tight games against these non-playoff teams or considered non-playoff teams doesn't give me a lot of confidence to say that, they are going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you. I want to fade the shit out of the Islanders, send them to the sun. I can't care for this team. I don't really have too much to say. The schedule sucks, and if they do get through this, then they could actually be a threat in the playoffs just because of how they play. They do play like a playoff team. It's just that doesn't really work as well in the regular season. They're never going to win a President's Trophy with that roster. But you've seen time and time again, their roster hasn't really changed much, and they did make it to the conference finals against Tampa in the COVID year.
Yeah, it was against...
No,
COVID. Yeah, it was the COVID year because the divisions were all fucked up, remember? So Montreal played Vegas in the
conference final, yeah.
So the Islanders, other than Sorokin putting on an absolute masterclass, I think I wouldn't put a ton of faith in this team making the playoffs at this point. There's just, it's too competitive in the East. The Metro and Atlantic just have some really, really good teams, really competitive hockey. So I would skip on that bet.
Who do you have like in the wild card spot then over the Islanders?
Well, so right now it's Pittsburgh and Washington. I don't know. I'm starting to not be as much of a believer in Washington. So there has to be obviously a team that comes up there. Is it Florida at this point? Like they're not.
Florida's been better.
They've been better recently. You know, they're a little bit more healthier now. Duclair is coming back too. So maybe Florida. And then the team with the 5th hardest schedule is the Ottawa Senators. So I'll say this before. I actually took them to make the playoffs like right after the All-Star break at like 20-1. And they're 13-1 now on DraftKings, which is where I placed the bet too. So a little bit, like obviously the lines come down a little bit more. It's a little shorter, but they just like Anton Forsberg just tore both his MCLs in one game, which was insane. The guy I don't think I've ever seen a goalie been stretchered off the ice before, and he was stretchered off, which was crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy.
And then Sanderson also got hurt, who was playing really well, this young defenseman that they have. Josh Norris is out for the season too. Talbot's hurt as well. So right now they have Kevin Mandolese and Mags Sogard, who are their 2 starting goalies. So I think before the deadline's done, I think we could definitely see them picking up a goalie somewhere. I feel like they have to. Like I don't think they're totally out of the playoff race. They're obviously still 6 or 7 points out, but like Detroit, they have a couple games in hand to Washington. So if they start to heat up, like their offense is really good. It's just defense and goalie is really where you make your bread and butter on that final playoff push. Right?
I don't know. Watching the Sens team though, like they seem so soft to me. Like yes, I'm a Leafs fan, but I don't know. I'm not big on this Sens team.
They have a couple. Like they definitely have more like skill guys than anything. If you think of any like depth or like hard guys, they have like Brady Tkachuk can act as that guy for sure. They have Austin Watson, who's just a dirtbag,
scumbag.
Yeah, and then a couple other guys, but yeah, really, it's not really like a menacing roster by any means. So it's you could take a flyer on them. I really wouldn't put a ton on it, but it's a long shot bet that I don't think is horrible value on it at this point. Okay, looking at the easiest schedule.
I have a quick note. Quick note in the hardest schedule.
Okay.
Tampa Bay has the 6th hardest schedule.
Yeah.
And this is interesting to me because obviously I'm a Leafs fan and there's going to be a big battle there in the Atlantic. So Tampa has to play Boston once, Carolina once, New Jersey 3 times, Toronto once, and New York once. So pretty tough battle there. I think they're tied right now. Tampa might actually be a point up right now because of their overtime win last night.
I think it looks like they're evenly tied right now. But so you just think of it as maybe Toronto gets like home ice, obviously.
Yeah. Like I'm thinking Toronto could get home ice there. But
I think that could definitely happen.
Again, like it could be. The Leafs are in an okay spot because they're like in the middle of the pack. You don't want, being a Leafs team, you do not want the easiest schedule because they will lose those games.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But yeah, I think it's just something to keep an eye on too. Can you bet on seeding or no?
You might be a
there's
little
like
bit
an
closer.
exacta in the Atlanta.
You might be able to a little bit closer to the playoffs. Actually, no, that wouldn't make sense. It's probably not at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than, and I guess like at this point, I think in the Atlantic, there's 3 teams that are going to make it. I don't think that's really going to change unless Florida goes absolutely berserk and Tampa starts to really, really suck. But I can't see that happening with Vasilevsky and the other guys they have on that team. So yeah, pretty much at this point, we're going to be transitioning to the Western Conference because we're looking at the 5 easiest schedules for the rest of the season. Dallas Stars have the easiest schedule for the rest of the season, and it's shown that in the NHL playoff odds as well. They're minus 8,000 to make the playoffs. They're first in the Central right now, so it totally makes sense. Do you think they will finish first in the Central by the time the playoffs come?
I do. I wrote down that. So they're leading the Central right now. Obviously, Winnipeg is 2 points back and has the 17th easiest schedule, and then Colorado is 10 points back with the 5th easiest schedule. So a lot of work for Colorado to do. I guess Winnipeg could leapfrog them, but seeing that Dallas does have the easiest schedule, but I would honestly almost rather be in Winnipeg's spot because they're going to be playing in more competitive games as we head into the playoffs. Dallas kind of looks like they have a cakewalk. They play the Blackhawks 3 times, the Coyotes twice, the Canucks 3 times, the Blues twice. Like those are some pretty free games. They could lose a couple in there, but I think I prefer Winnipeg's being a bit tougher heading into that intensity there. They could kind of coast a bit and maybe lose some intensity.
So do you think, so right now I'm just looking at the Central Division odds. So Dallas is minus 150 right now to win that division as leading it by 2 points. Mm-hmm. Winnipeg 3-1, and then Colorado plus 425. So would you, if you had to make one bet on those 3 teams to win the Central, would you take the Stars or would you take some plus money there somewhere else?
That's a tough one. I don't know.
I feel like you actually be able to spread out your money to be able to like almost secure a profit at this point. Maybe like put a bigger wager on the Stars and then maybe split it between the Jets and the Avalanche.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the Avalanche a little bit later on, or a little bit later on this video, because they do have the 5th easiest schedule, so at the end. But a bet on the Jets wouldn't be too bad. Like these are two teams that have, like the Stars and Jets, two really good goalies.
Yeah.
So it's tough to predict kind of what else the play is going to be, but you can kind of confirm in your head that the goaltending will be solid.
Yeah.
Looking at the next team, the Seattle Kraken, looking at who they're playing for the rest of the season, they get Columbus and Chicago each once, and then Anaheim twice, Arizona 3 times, and San Jose twice. They're 3rd in the Pacific right now. And the first thing that kind of stood out to me, because we've seen Seattle since the All-Star break lose quite a few games.
Yeah.
Like I think they only have 1 win since the All-Star break, and it was against
The Flyers.
So they are plus 550 to miss the playoffs at this point. With the second easiest schedule, is that a good bet?
I think it's sneaky.
I don't think it's that bad. Like their goalies I think we're playing way above where we're usually seeing Martin Jones and Philip Grubauer play, at least when you compare it to the last 2 years. So plus 550, I don't think it's that crazy. They're a very solid defensive team, don't get me wrong, but they do have trouble scoring the puck sometimes, and it's been very evident since the All-Star break.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that would be honestly a great bet. I'm not huge on the Seattle team. When their lines aren't all firing, they really seem to struggle. Like when they had that road trip in December when they won like 13 games straight on the road in that massive road trip, all 4 lines are contributing. When they don't have that, they can barely squeak by with like 2, 3, kind of similar to how the Islanders play. They don't really have a star. They're a bit more congested. They're quick, but I think that's a good play.
They definitely don't have 1 star at this point. So I think to make that bet plus 550 is not crazy to say at this point. Like the Pacific Division, I feel like there's a ton of ambiguity before the end of the season ends. Like you got the Oilers and the Flames who are out of a playoff spot right now. So or maybe just Oilers, maybe just in the wild card spot at this point.
I think no, they've been hot. I think they're in like 3rd. They could be in a wild card.
Yeah, wild card 1, Minnesota 2, and then Calgary's right there too. So the next team, and it kind of coincides with what we were talking about with Seattle, the Kings, 3rd easiest schedule. They've got Columbus, Anaheim twice, Arizona, Vancouver 3 times, who's really not playing well right now, and then Montreal. To win the division at 5-1 right now, the Kings, I don't think that's a bad bet either. Like,
no.
What have we heard about Vegas? Like, they are out of the headlines in my mind. Like, I don't see them anywhere. They just kind of go day by day, winning random ass games in Vegas, and then their goaltending hasn't been as good recently too. They've got injuries throughout the whole year. Their offense, like I think Stone out for an extended period of time at this point too. So, and then we just talked about Seattle and kind of how they're struggling since the All-Star break. So at 5-1, I really don't think that's a bad look.
Yeah, I think it's a good look. And like you said, we don't really hear their name often. The only time I see their name is when a player is getting put on the IR.
Yeah.
Like it seems like just bad news surrounding the team. They went on a bit of a skid, but they've won 3 straight. So it's interesting. I'm not really sure. It's so tough with that Pacific Division because all of them have these easy schedules because they're all playing each other.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. That's a good point looking at this. Like 3 out of these 5 teams we're talking about are all in the Pacific. And then 2 of the other ones obviously in the Central. Like the Western Conference level is just abysmal this year.
Yeah, I don't think it's bad, especially if they can add on like Chychrun. Like I think right now would be the time to bet it because they are front runners allegedly to get Chychrun. So you'd probably get a better price right now if you were to bet it.
Yeah, for sure. They're one point shy of Vegas right now. Vegas has 1 game in hand, but at this point of the season, I don't think that makes that big of a difference. I think this LA team is very good. They have a very good roster, and I think Todd McClellan is a good coach too. So looking at the next team here, Calgary Flames, 4th easiest remaining schedule. Chicago, they play Anaheim 3 times, Arizona twice, San Jose twice, and then Vancouver twice. Those are some really easy games, but this team fucking finds ways to lose games all the time. Jacob Markstrom just has completely lost all capabilities of being able to stop.
Where do you like it started in that playoff series against? Was it the Oilers? Like he was brutal.
Yeah, I think so.
Because he was fine against the Stars.
Yeah, he was fine against the Stars. They also outshot the Stars like 50-20 every game too.
Yeah.
Like there's just this rosters overhaul that they did. It looked great on paper. Everyone was like, wow, this is great for who they lost, who they brought in. Like it maybe even added more value to this team, but losing Kachuk and Gaudreau that's losing like 200 points of right there, right? Pretty much. So, and I don't think as much as Kadri, Uyghur, and Huberdeau are great hockey players, I don't think they can fill that void. And we've seen it. They haven't been able to at this point. So are you confident enough to be like, yeah, they're going to make the playoffs? Because they're minus 320 right now. I still think they could be an odd team out here, in my opinion.
Yeah, they could be. It really just comes down to their goaltending. I mean, if you look at like advanced analytics, like their expected goals for and everything are just through the charts.
Very good.
I think having a goaltender back there that they would actually be confident in, it would push those even further because obviously it's affecting their play overall. I don't know. I can't bet them to not make the playoffs, especially looking at the division. Like we were talking about Seattle and a couple other teams there that we're not as confident in. Like I think they're still a pretty solid team on paper. That's why it's so bewildering to me that they're losing these games.
Yeah, I agree too. It's almost fascinating. Like I don't want to say it because I keep betting on the Flames. I keep losing money, but
they're banned for me.
Yeah, at this point they have to be. Like they did that loss they just had to the Sens, like inexcusable. You can't. That must have drove
I wonder what Sutter was doing to them.
Through the roof. 3-1 with like 2 minutes left against not one of the greatest teams in the Eastern Conference, and Markstrom lets in 2 not great goals,
Stinkers.
and then a shit goal in overtime too to lose on a Stützle like fluffer to the net. So
I can't think of like a much worse environment to be in right now. Like think of being in that locker room with Sutter on your ass and then having Markstrom in net. Like it would just be so toxic.
Who's the captain? Did they have one or no?
No.
Yeah, I thought it was maybe Hannafin, but no. Yeah, like that's what I mean too. Like, where's the leadership coming from too at this point with new guys in the room and like the same guys from last year to a certain extent? So it just seems like a clusterfuck over there. So I would just stay away. The last team we'll be talking about, Colorado Avalanche, 5th easiest schedule. I think teams need to obviously watch out for Colorado. Like they did win the Stanley Cup last year. They have Chicago left, Anaheim twice, Arizona 3 times, San Jose 3 times, and then Montreal 1 more time too. I think betting on them to win the Stanley Cup at this point isn't a terrible bet. I think they could definitely make definitely the Western Conference Finals and even the Stanley Cup coming out of the West for this group at plus 650. Like, why are they so short? Probably because this entire season they've been ridden with injuries. Like they've had someone hurt for, I want to say, every single game. I don't think they've had a full roster for any of these games they've played so far.
Yeah. They've had a really tough go at it. What is it, plus 650 to win the Stanley Cup? Or?
Plus 650 to win the Stanley Cup and plus 425 to win their division at this point, too.
To win the division?
Yeah.
10 points back, though.
10 points back of the division. Yeah, that's why I'm like, the division, I could see why those odds are so long. Stanley Cup, though, because I think...
Well, what is the odds on, like, to make it to the Stanley Cup? Because that would be an interesting bet. Because I think, like, we talked about this in our betting show that we do every day, and Colorado, like, they could easily just run through the West on any given day if they get hot, and they're going to be healthy at some point.
They're 3-1 to win the West.
Yeah, so point. I like that. I think that's a good bet too. Like, who would give them a run for their money there?
They're favorite. They're favorite to win the West.
Yeah, like the only team that scares me, like, does LA scare you with Colorado?
Right now, it goes Colorado, then Vegas is the second favorite, Edmonton is the third, Stars are the fourth, and then Minnesota is the fifth, and tied with Calgary. So, and then Seattle and Winnipeg down there. LA is 15-1. Holy shit, Dallas 6-1.
6-1.
So, yeah, definitely a lot of different lines we're seeing here for Colorado, and like we mentioned, like even right now, Cale Makar is out, Josh Manson's still not playing, Landeskog hasn't played at all. Eric Johnson's out, and then Francouz just got hurt as well. So you have Georgiev, and then I think Jonas Johansson from the AHL they just called up, and he's really bad. So I think taking a stab at those odds, either to win the West or to win the Stanley Cup at plus 625 to win the West at 3-1, I don't think are terrible looks. Would you agree?
No, I love it. I'm probably going to be locking in Colorado to win the West. I can't bet them to win the division right now, but I think in the playoffs when their whole team gets healthy again, they could even make some moves at the deadline here too. So it'll be interesting to see, but I like those plays.
Definitely. Yeah, I think I'll be looking to lock in Colorado win the West as well. Obviously, make sure all these odds that I've been talking about are all from DraftKings. Sure to line shop. I'm sure you could probably find better odds on Colorado to win the West. We'll be posting some of the links to sign up at some of these sports books in the description below of this YouTube video. We'll be posting BetMGM, DraftKings, Caesars. There's tons out there, so definitely sign up at multiple if you're trying to get into sports betting. If you're trying to look at line shopping as well, obviously the best options to do there. That's it for this video today. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Be sure to like, subscribe, join the Discord, and we'll see you guys next time.